So I finished The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. You know what? Sometimes on this page, I feel like I pile on the negatives, and that's not always the most helpful thing to do. It doesn't make me feel good. So we'll start with the positives. Whoever designed this book, bravo. It is a gorgeous looking book. The physical book, yes. Like, these sprayed edges, gorgeous. This colour story, love it. Like, this is a stunning cover. I don't think the marketing team fully did justice to the end pages either, because, like, how stunning is that? So, whoever designed this, I hope you're well paid, because she's beautiful. Like, look at her. Now that we've got the positives out of the way, let's talk about how much of a poorly written slog this book was. Oh, I'm sorry. It was so slow. You know, it just wasn't. It was historical fiction, but the problem is when you pick that genre, it is such a melting pot. You have to be a writer with the most gentle of touches to truly nail historical fiction, because it's not just about it being well researched. There has to be an appreciation of the tone of that era. There has to be some sensibility to it, and this just didn't feel like it was informed in that way. And for context, so that we're clear, this was my introduction to Leigh Bardugo. I am not familiar with the Grishaverse. I've not read Ninth House or any of her other stuff, so I didn't know what to expect, and that didn't help because automatically I thought, oh, I don't like this writer's style. Like, the actual way that she writes, not a fan of it. But that doesn't always mean that you're going to dislike the book, because style isn't everything. But then the actual plot and characters as well just weren't doing it for me. Because the actual historical fiction of it, it's supposed to be like this Spanish golden age tale, but that doesn't come across very well, and so because that's so threadbare, what we're left with is this odd smattering of generic romantasy tropes that just felt so overwrought, and I couldn't get into it. It felt so long-winded. I mean, our main character, Lucia, would you be shocked if I told you that she's a poor servant girl who's an orphan, but she secretly has magical powers? No, you wouldn't be shocked, because you could go into the romantasy section of a bookshop and point to 800 other books with that identical premise. Like, I know that's so dismissive, but if you're not going to write it well and it's not going to be creative, I'm having a hard time justifying why someone should pick this up, especially when this author has such a pedigree. Like, I'm not familiar with her work, but I know that she is so popular in the book talk scene. Like, loads of people probably flock to pick this up, and I can't help but feel that some of them were probably left a bit disappointed, unless they expect underwhelming writing from her. I don't know. So yes, Lucia, should we get into her? She felt like a walking anachronism. The way she acts, the things that she says, she felt so 21st century, so modern. So to have her in this 16th century Spanish time, the whole thing clashed. I was like, no, she must be a time traveller, because this story, I can't give it any credence as historical fiction because she doesn't fit into the time. And I think maybe I'm giving the writer too much credit. It was their way of sort of presenting her as an outsider who didn't really belong. But to me, at least, it felt wrong. Lucia, she likes to read, and she also wants to find love. I know, so relatable, really hitting the core of the book talk audience. But she's hoping she gets entered into this like magical competition where the king is looking for like his next person to like assist with looking into the future and miracles and stuff like that, because this is fresh off of the disaster of the Spanish Armada. So they've just got rid of like the previous fortune teller person, because that was such a huge disaster for the Spanish Empire. But why did it have to be a competition? Why is it always a competition? I somewhat blame Hunger Games for this, for making everything a competition. I'm over it. Can we think of a new plot device to put our characters through? Everything's a competition. I'm so sick of a competition, you know? Like, it's so played out. Can we talk about the romance as well? So Luthia, her like bodyguard that's protecting her throughout the competition, his name is Santander? No, that's not his name. Okay, that's what I'm going to call him now. Luthia, she goes to Santander Bank and she gets a high interest ISA. No, she has a relationship with Santander Bank, and there's a lot of intimacy between them in the story, but the whole time it felt so sterile. This is not just Leigh Bardugo's fault. I think a lot of modern writers overestimate their ability to write intimacy and portray spice in their work. It's hard. Like, it's not as easy as it looks. Like, to actually make an audience root for a couple, like, that's hard. And this needed to be workshopped more because their relationship felt so thrown together. Like, all of a sudden they were obsessed with each other, and it's like, what? Like, what? That you've not even really done anything together. I mean, you have slept together, which felt very out of place in the 16th century. I was like, oh, this young girl, this young virgin, she immediately jumps into the bed with the first guy she likes. Like, I don't think that would have happened. Like, you know, she doesn't even like contemplate like, oh my god, I've just slept with a man before getting married. Like, how terrible is that? Like, you know, obviously looking at it through the lens of the 16th century, like, where's that sensibility? Why is she so modern in that way? It's whatever. It's a can of worms. We find out later on that Santander Bank, he is immortal. Like, he's been living for 5 centuries, but he never gives like a reason to why he chooses Luthia to be so like devoted to. You know, like, it's never really made clear why after all this time he settles for her, and I just found that strange. Like, it was such a core bit that was missing from the puzzle of why they're together and why they suddenly have these strong feelings for each other. And spoiler alert, if you have any desire to read this book, by the end of it, when the two of them are supposed to be executed, but then they like go on and live forever as like spirits in love or something like that. I just thought, oh, how terrible. Like, immortality with this one person and you're never allowed anyone else. Like, ugh. Like, that felt very religious and old-timey, but, you know, also not very satisfying as an ending. There was actually one character in this whole story that I was somewhat invested in, and that was Valentina, the sort of lady of the house who employs Luthia as a servant, because she actually had an arc, unlike everybody else. She starts off as this very cruel Lady Tremaine-like character that we don't care for, and then as the story progresses, we come to realise, oh, she's so bitter and twisted because she's in this unhappy marriage, and, you know, actually goes through a process of self-discovery where she realises she's better off without her husband. And even though that felt awfully progressive for a 16th century Spanish historical fiction book, I enjoyed that, and I wish more writers incorporated characters that were over the hill but could still show self-improvement and growth. But that is not to say that I recommend this book under any circumstance, unless you want a book that's very pretty on your shelf that you'll never actually read.